Does something else demand your time? Some pressing appointment, perhaps? In return for your help, I offer something priceless.
My freedom.
Freedom can be taken away. As you well know, I offer knowledge. Everything I have learned. I will teach you economics, mathematics, philosophy, science.
To read and write?
Of course.
Hey y'all, welcome back to Bait al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. This is the first entry into our self-education / Escape the Matrix series. Next week, we'll be looking at Montaigne, but for now, I wanted to start by talking about one of my favorite novels of all time. In the Count of Monte Cristo, Edmond Dante is falsely imprisoned because of allegations that he's a Bonapartist, a supporter of Napoleon. Arrested on the eve of his wedding, he loses his bride, his father, a newfound prestigious job, and a life marked by a bright future. After wasting away in the darkness of his prison cell for years, he is miraculously stumbled upon by a prisoner who's attempting to escape, the Abbé Faria. The Abbé is a man of extraordinary education, ability, and grace, who had made his living as a tutor to aristocrats. He decides to cultivate his 3 best traits in Edmond as they dig a tunnel out of their prison. I don't want to spoil the book completely, but Edmond manages to escape the confines of the fortress they've been held in, having seemingly traded 13 years of his young adult life for the education and poise of an aristocrat, a count, and the possibility of finding a vast fortune befitting one. I adore the romance and practicality of Edmund's story. To an extent, we're all falsely imprisoned. As you saw in the video, Edmund enters captivity illiterate. Functionally, this means that he's beholden to the opinions, practices, and viewpoints common to his era. He lacks the ability to intellectually explore other ways of life or places. His entire life experience is relegated to what he can see and who he can talk to. His life framework is solely the product of what he is verbally fed by others and can come up with himself. While this could have meant he'd be strikingly original and cognitively exceptional, the much more likely case of him being simple and naive occurred. This is precisely what his enemies exploited when they organized a plot to imprison him. Though Edmund thought he was free before he was placed in the confines of a stone cell, he wasn't. He was already stranded in spiritual isolation. When his physical conditions matched this and he managed to escape and fundamentally elevate his character and abilities, he threw off the shackles of this captivity of the mind. That's what we're here to do. We're like Edmond Dante, looking for our own escape routes. René Descartes was a French soldier, philosopher, and all-around amazing person who recognized this mental imprisonment in himself. In Discourse on Method, Descartes describes his path to clearly seeing the matrix and his method for breaking out. It's pretty amazing that even back then, he saw this for what it was and is. Descartes was raised on books, believing that mastering them would endow him with an all-encompassing understanding of the world and the things in it. Upon nearing the end of his education, he was really surprised. He found in himself more doubts and a greater degree of ignorance than at the beginning. While I would argue that this indicated his education was successful, he was deeply troubled. After all, he was at one of the best schools in Europe, and it was a place where he thought if anywhere there were learned people, they'd be there. Descartes honestly appraised himself, and he viewed his accomplishments as being above the average of his peers. As a result, he reluctantly concluded that there was no such understanding in the world of the kind that he'd sought. He still loved the fields he had studied and believed they endowed him with a magnificent set of tools to explore the world with. He described reading books as having conversations with the most honorable of past ages, public speaking and debate as possessing incomparable power and beauty, and math as serving one's curiosity and facilitating all of nature to make people's lives easier. That being said, Descartes resolved to abandon academic study for as long as needed to search for no knowledge other than what he could find within himself or in the world. He toured courts and distant countries, tested himself in battle and commerce, and mingled with people of every kind. After having toured the globe, he began to cautiously disbelieve anything which he had been persuaded of by the examples of others or custom. He wanted to live in ways he knew absolutely to be true. He also developed the opinion that those who had different views were not barbarians or savages because of this. They simply exercised their reason in different directions. Descartes wrote that this enabled him to gently free himself from the many errors that darken our natural light and render us less able to listen to reason. This sort of exploration is dangerous because it threatens to temporarily debase one's life framework. He took this into account and laid out two types of people who simply should accept what they had been convinced of by the examples of others or the general customs they were raised in. The first was those who believe they're more capable than they are. He feared this would lead to hasty decisions and a lack of order in the process of evaluation, resulting in people who were lost for their entire lives because they continuously stray from the path they've laid out for a new and exciting one. The second was those who have enough reason or modesty to admit that there are people whose reason and understanding dwarfs their own. Descartes said that these people should just follow the opinions of the smarter folks. While he mentioned that he'd be of the second variety, there was one thing that held him back. He had learned under so many great teachers who had contradicted each other that he had no confidence in the teachings of individuals. He was forced to chart his own course. In order to systematically go about this, he devised 4 principles. The first was to never accept anything as true that he didn't confirm himself. The second, to divide each of his challenges into the smallest parts possible and then organize them in an order he could attack. The third, to begin his study with the simplest and easiest things and then to slowly increase in the complexity of his thought and questions. He would assume order even among things that weren't clearly connected. And the fourth, to be extraordinarily thorough so that nothing would escape his investigations. Like I said earlier, he knew that this could really affect his ability to function in daily life. It's hard to work a job or do anything if you're constantly wondering about the most basic questions of life, like whether your religion is correct, how you should treat people, whether you should become a criminal or choose a more legal profession, and so on. To resolve this, he also came up with a 4-part framework to operate within while he was fixing things up. The first part of it was to obey the laws and customs of his country, stick with the religion he was raised in, and hold the most moderate and acceptable opinions of the smartest people around him. It's important to note that he didn't think any of these were better than anyone else's. They were just what he grew up around. And he also decided, when caught between 2 opposing opinions, that he'd choose the most modern. I take this to mean mild and enlightened, so as to stay away from extremes. The second part was to be confident in the actions he takes and to follow even the most doubtful opinions he had convinced himself of. He wanted to fully allow his reason to guide him. Descartes didn't want to be a character of the first group who shouldn't undertake the journey. He wanted to stay on one path. The third part, to solely focus on changing his will, desires, and mind rather than fortune, the world, or anything outside of the one thing he could control, his thoughts. The fourth, to choose the best occupation for himself. He eventually chose philosophy because it's what he had been doing. Following these with some hard work, sweat equity, and intellectual training, Descartes was able to free himself, explore the world as most people say they want to, and create countless philosophic, scientific, and mathematic theories which are still talked about today. Even the graphing system you learned about in school, the Cartesian coordinate system, was invented by him. While most of us haven't received the first-rate education he did, and that's why I encourage you guys to read so much, and in providing snippets of these books to pique your interests, it's totally possible to give yourself a wonderful adult education and also use these precepts. What could you do if you were to follow these? Who would you become? Why not see?